Ready? I'm going to read your bio. Please come up. Mr. Kazunori Yamaguchi was born in, I don't need to say the year, May 25th in Japan, and at the moment he's working for, okay, let me read the bio properly. Working for 2009, working for Yamaguchi Real Estate Appraisal Service Incorporated as president and CEO until now. In 1999, Yamaguchi Real Estate Appraisal Service as a managing director. In 1994, was working at Daiwa Property, and he's educated at Waseda University. He got MBA in finance. Undergraduate is BA in law at Ritsu-Macon University. And he got certification from Certified International Investment Analysis, Certified Real Estate Appraiser. He will give a presentation. The topic is Population Foreshadows, Housing Bubble and Burst.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. My name is Kazunori Yamaguchi, and I am a Japanese real estate appraiser. I'd like to spend the next 20 minutes explaining my paper, Population Foreshadows, Housing Bubbles and Busts. I've divided my talk into 4 parts. First, the Japanese program, the 20 lost years and aging. Second, the correlation between housing bubble and working age population, or WAP for short. Third, in turn, the correlation between housing price and WAP. And finally, discussion part, or in other words, bonus part. We can predict population with a high degree of reliability based on various government and UN studies. If population and housing prices are related, then can we predict housing prices as well? By observing changes in population, can we predict economic and social conditions? Right. Let me try to answer these questions. I'd like to begin by the first part, the Japanese bubble and the population problem. Japanese property prices rose dramatically in the latter half of the 1990s. Let's take a look at figure 1. This graph shows the Japanese property bubble. The blue line is the residential index, and the red line is the commercial index. Comparing the indexes before the bubble with those at the peak, we can see the residential index and the commercial index increased approximately 3-fold and 5-fold, respectively. Here, we see another point of view about the Japanese bubble. Figure 2 shows the transitions in the real GDP growth and the real interest rate. The blue line is the real GDP growth, and the red line is the real interest rate. Please pay attention to the period during which the real GDP growth exceeded the real interest rate here. It coincides with the period of the Japanese bubble in the latter half of the 1980s. This observation is also true for the American housing bubble. Next, we turn to the Japanese population problem. Figure 3 presents a graph showing the percentage of elderly Japanese, 23% in 2010. This suggests 1 in 4 people in Japan is an elderly person. Figure 4 is a scatter diagram of the elderly ratio and the rate of change in housing prices by prefecture. The horizontal axis is the elderly ratio, and the vertical axis is the rate of change in housing prices. Using a linear regression, we can see a declining straight line. This suggests the higher the elderly ratio, the larger the rate of decline in housing prices. Kochi Prefecture, Tokushima Prefecture, Akita Prefecture. The higher the elderly ratio, the larger the rate of decline in housing prices. Here, let's take a look at table 1. The correlation coefficient between the elderly ratio and the rate of change in housing prices was strongly positive in 1995, plus 0.78, as a reaction to the bubble. However, it turned negative in 2005, minus 0.38. The negative correlation has become even more significant in 2010. About these elderly people, the United Nations has noted they will continue to increase. Let's take a look at figure 5. Here, accompanied by the continued increase in the number of elderly people. Another point of interest is the drastic decrease of the WAP, working age population, from 80 million to 55 million by 2050. And the WAP percentage will drop from 64% to 51%. Next part, we note the WAP percentage. Figure 6 shows the transitions in the quantity representing WAP growth minus total population growth. Also here, we can point out the coincidence of the bubble. We can see the WAP growth was larger than the total population growth in the bubble economy of the 1980s. Let me move on to the second part. About this WAP, working age population, while studying the percentage of it, I discovered a strange coincidence. Let's take a look at figure 7. This graph shows the transitions in the WAP percentage and housing prices in Japan. The blue line is the WAP percentage, and the red line is housing prices. While observing the peaks of the two quantities, we may note a strange coincidence, as if the WAP percentage peak implied the housing bubble and the bust. Let's take a look at figure 8. Similarly in the USA, the WAP percentage and housing prices peaked in 2005 and 2006, respectively. This is also a strange coincidence. Figure 9 and 10 also show evidence of the housing bubble busts in Ireland and Spain, respectively. These graphs also show a strange coincidence. However, as figure 11 shows, in the UK, while the WAP percentage peaked in 1950, housing prices peaked in 2007. But closer to the second peak of the WAP percentage in 2008. This is also a strange coincidence. Following the observations recorded in figure 7 to 11, I performed a statistical check to confirm whether the peak years for housing prices and for the WAP percentage coincide. In this case, I check the interval estimation for the population mean of the difference between the year the housing bubble burst and the year the WAP percentage peaked. The IMF identifies 47 house price busts from 1970 to 2008. If we limit our consideration to one property bust in each country that has undergone such multiple property busts, the list of 47 house price busts condenses to 16 observations. Using these 16 observations, we can assert with a 95% confidence level that the housing bubbles burst within an 8-year interval surrounding the WAP percentage peak. Namely, 2 years before and 6 years after the WAP percentage peak. That is, the statistical check verifies both events occur at about the same time. Okay, moving on to the third part. In order to find the correlation between housing prices and the WAP, working age population, I use a regression analysis. Here, I use housing prices in the 20 developed countries researched by the OECD. Let's take a look at table 2. First, I check the correlation between the percentage change in housing prices and the percentage change in the WAP using panel data in 2000 to 2011. According to this result, alpha and beta are statistically significant, but R square is a little low. In this period, in 2000 to 2011, a major economic event occurred, as you know, the Lehman crisis in 2008. Then, I divide the data into two periods, drawing a boundary line at the Lehman crisis. Let's take a look at table 3. According to this result, before the Lehman crisis, alpha and beta are statistically significant, and R square increases to 0.43. Whereas, after the Lehman crisis, it falters. In table 4, to explore some other factors that may have been related to housing prices, I use a multiple regression analysis. According to this result, before the Lehman crisis, the correlation with the WAP is only statistically significant. Whereas, after the Lehman crisis, the correlation with GDP in place of the WAP is statistically significant. However, it has been only 4 years since the crisis. This observation may just reflect temporary economic confusion. Next, let's take a look at table 5. In order to find the correlation between housing prices and the WAP in some detail, I use a regression analysis of the percentage change in housing prices and the percentage change in the WAP for each country in each year. The results are statistically significant in the countries that have experienced housing bubbles or rises of over 10% per year in housing prices. For example, Greece, Ireland, Netherlands, New Zealand, Spain, and the United States. These countries also exhibit wide fluctuations because beta are over 10. Greece, Ireland, Netherlands, New Zealand, Spain, and the United States. Furthermore, in Spain, R squared is 0.89, which means the percentage change in housing prices is almost entirely explained by the percentage change in the WAP. However, in these results, Japan's R squared is a little low, 0.27. So, we cannot use these results as forecasting or explanatory models. Nevertheless, according to figure 7, there is no doubt that Japanese housing prices and the WAP percentage have decreased in the same way after the bubble burst. In order to ascertain the correlation between the two quantities, I employ a regression analysis using Japanese housing prices and the WAP percentage over 20 years since the bubble burst. Table 6 presents the findings. Table 6. When we consider the Japanese case, which represents a long-term point of view, the correlation between housing prices and the WAP percentage is statistically significant. Here, let's take a look at this slide. This slide is a time series graph of Japanese WAP, working age population. The columns are the increasing levels of the WAP, and the line graph is the WAP percentage. As referred to earlier, the WAP percentage peaked in 1992 and will continue to drop until 2055. What is worse, the WAP itself will decrease until 2100. That is forever. Let's take a look at this slide. This graph shows the transitions in Japanese housing prices indexes. The blue line is the actual value, and the red line is the theoretical value using table 6 result. Table 6 result. The correlation between housing prices and the WAP percentage. Under these circumstances, it is highly possible that Japanese housing prices will also decline in the foreseeable future. Finally, let us consider population from every angle. This slide is the same graph in China. The WAP percentage will peak in 2014, and the WAP itself will decrease from 2017, like Japan. This slide is also the indicator of bubble in China. WAP growth minus total population growth. Just like Japan, the WAP growth has been larger than the total population growth for years. So we may be able to point out this period as a bubble. Next, this slide is the same graph in the USA. The WAP percentage peaked in 2005 and will continue to drop in the foreseeable future. However, unlike Japan and China, the WAP itself will increase in the foreseeable future. Decrease in China, decrease in Japan, but increase in the USA. On this point, I think the USA will be still strong. Next, this is a summary of peak years for various elements. The population peak in Eastern Europe was in 1992, and the WAP percentage peak in Germany was in 1986. Near these peaks, the fall of the Berlin Wall occurred in 1999. Further, the population peak in Russian Federation was in 1993, and the collapse of the Soviet Union occurred in 1991, near the population peak. Furthermore, considering the Eurozone, we note the WAP peaked in 2010, which also happened to coincide with the Greek debt crisis and the Eurozone crisis. Thus, I conclude population peaks foreshadow busts and may relate to historical events. Meanwhile, the situation in Japan has been worsening, with a decrease not just in the WAP, but also in the total population. In fact, the situation may go beyond the 20 lost years to become the 30 lost years, or even the 50 lost years. Let's take a look at figure 12. This graph shows the total Japanese population in blocks of 100 years each. We can see it increased drastically after the Meiji Restoration, Japanese Revolution, in the 19th century. Worryingly, this figure closely resembles the graph of the bubble economy, just like the stock price bubble, the property bubble, and so on. So, we can say our generation has been living in a population bubble for years, and this bubble has burst. We Japanese should aim for a small but shining country from now on. So, in summary, I have reached three conclusions. First, the year that the percentage of the WAP peaks coincides with the bursting of housing bubbles. Second, the rate of change in housing prices is significantly correlated with the rate of change in the WAP in most of the countries whose housing prices rose dramatically. And third, we can predict housing prices to some extent using the prediction of the WAP, unless financial innovations intervene. Thank you very much for your attention.
Very interesting, even though it looks like gloomy situation, but I believe there is always light at the end of the tunnel. You have 3 minutes for one question from the audience. Any question?
What's going to happen in Australia?
WAP percentage peak in 2008, but WAP and the population continues to grow forever. The UN prospect.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We give a best applause to Mr. Yamaguchi. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we will have another 30 minutes presentation from Mr. Cho Alpha Huiha. He's the PhD from Land Economics Department, National Chengchi University of Taiwan. And at the moment, he is the president of Honda Appraiser Firm in Taiwan. Oh, Honda Appraiser Firm in Taiwan. He would like to present his paper.